In the dead of night, on a threshing floor where the wind carried both chaff and destiny, a widowed foreigner made a decision that would alter the course of history itself. She lay at the feet of a man she barely knew, her heart pounding with a courage born not of recklessness but of desperation transformed into faith. This was no ordinary gamble. This was a woman staking everything on the character of one man and the providence of one God. And as the hours stretched toward dawn, the fate of kings and the lineage of the Messiah hung in the balance, waiting for a single word to be spoken in the darkness. Before we journey deeper into this night that changed everything, I invite you to walk with me through the hidden corridors of this sacred story. Subscribe to this channel, for together we will uncover the profound truths that lie beneath the surface of Scripture, truths that speak to our own longings for redemption, belonging, and divine purpose. The story begins not in triumph but in tragedy. In the days when judges ruled over Israel, when every man did what was right in his own eyes, famine spread across the land of Judah like a curse. The fields that once overflowed with grain became dust. The vineyards withered. And a man named Elimelech, whose very name meant God is king, made a fateful decision. He would leave Bethlehem, the house of bread, and take his family to Moab, the land of Israel's ancient enemies, the descendants of Lot's shameful union. It was a choice born of survival, perhaps, but it carried with it the weight of spiritual compromise. He took his wife Naomi, whose name meant pleasant, and his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they settled in a foreign land, far from the covenant promises of their God. The years passed in Moab, and tragedy struck with relentless precision. First, Elimelech died, leaving Naomi a widow in a strange land. Her sons married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, and for 10 years they built lives in this place of exile. But death was not finished with this family. Both sons perished, leaving 3 widows bound together by grief, stripped of every earthly security. In that ancient world, a woman without a husband or sons was more than vulnerable. She was invisible, voiceless, one step away from starvation. Naomi, once pleasant, became bitter. She had left Bethlehem full, she would say, but the Lord had brought her back empty. When news reached Naomi that the famine in Judah had ended, that the Lord had visited his people with bread once more, she made her decision. She would return home. Not in triumph, but in defeat. Not as a matriarch with sons and grandchildren, but as a hollow shell of the woman who had left. She urged her daughters-in-law to return to their mother's houses, to find new husbands among their own people, to embrace the gods of Moab and forget the sorrows they had shared. Orpah, after tears and protestations, turned back. But Ruth clung to Naomi with a grip that transcended mere loyalty. In that moment, Ruth spoke words that would echo through eternity, words recorded in the first chapter of the book that bears her name, verses 16 and 17. She declared that where Naomi went, she would go. Where Naomi lodged, she would lodge. Naomi's people would be her people. Naomi's God would be her God. Where Naomi died, there Ruth would die and be buried. She called upon the Lord himself to witness this vow, invoking his judgment if anything but death separated them. This was no casual commitment. This was covenant language, the language of marriage, the language of utter abandonment to a new identity. Ruth, the Moabite, was choosing to become Ruth, the daughter of Israel. She was choosing Yahweh over Chemosh, the God of Abraham over the gods of her fathers. She was choosing a future she could not see over the security she knew. And so they returned together to Bethlehem, arriving at the beginning of the barley harvest. The whole town stirred at their arrival. The women who had known Naomi in her prosperity barely recognized the woman who returned in her emptiness. Naomi, whose name meant pleasant, told them not to call her that anymore. "Call me Mara," she said, "for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty." This was her testimony, her declaration that God himself had testified against her, that the Almighty had afflicted her. She could not see beyond her grief to the redemption that was already unfolding. Ruth, meanwhile, faced an impossible situation. She was a foreigner in a land that viewed Moabites with suspicion and disdain. The law of Moses, found in Deuteronomy chapter 23 verses 3 through 6, forbade Moabites from entering the assembly of the Lord even to the 10th generation. Ruth's people had refused to give Israel bread and water during the Exodus. They had hired Balaam to curse Israel. The enmity ran deep, carved into national memory. Yet here she was, a Moabite widow in Bethlehem, with nothing but her devotion to an embittered mother-in-law and a God she was only beginning to know. But the law of Moses also contained provisions for the vulnerable. In Leviticus chapter 19 verse 9 and chapter 23 verse 22, and again in Deuteronomy chapter 24 verses 19 through 21, God had commanded his people to leave the corners of their fields unharvested and not to gather the gleanings. These were to be left for the poor and the foreigner. It was a system of dignified provision, allowing the destitute to work for their sustenance rather than beg. And so Ruth, embodying both humility and initiative, asked Naomi for permission to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain, following after the reapers in whose sight she might find favor. Providence, that invisible hand of divine orchestration, guided her steps. She happened to come to the portion of field belonging to Boaz, a mighty man of wealth from the clan of Elimelech. The text says she happened upon it, but there are no accidents in the economy of God. Boaz was a kinsman, a relative who carried within his legal obligations the possibility of redemption. His very name meant in him is strength, and he would prove to embody both power and compassion in ways Ruth could not yet imagine. Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted his workers with a blessing. "The Lord be with you," he called out, and they responded, "The Lord bless you." This was no mere formality. This was a man who brought the presence of God into his business dealings, who viewed his laborers not as commodities but as covenant brothers and sisters. His eyes, scanning the field, fell upon the young woman gleaning among the sheaves. "Who is that young woman?" he asked his servant who was set over the reapers. The servant's answer revealed both Ruth's identity and her character. "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab," he explained. "She asked permission to glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter." Here was a woman of diligence, of respect for authority, of tireless devotion to providing for the one she loved. She did not presume. She did not take. She asked, and then she labored without ceasing. Boaz approached Ruth, and his words carried the weight of protection and provision. He instructed her not to glean in another field, but to remain close to his young women workers. He commanded his young men not to touch her, addressing the very real danger a foreign woman faced in the fields. When she was thirsty, she could drink from the vessels his servants had drawn. This was extraordinary generosity, extending privileges far beyond the minimum requirements of the gleaning laws. Ruth fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and asked why she had found such favor in his eyes that he should take notice of her, a foreigner. His answer revealed that her story had preceded her. "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me," Boaz said, as recorded in Ruth chapter 2 verse 11. "How you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people you did not know before." Her sacrifice, her loyalty, her covenant commitment had not gone unnoticed. Boaz invoked a blessing upon her, praying that the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings she had come to take refuge, would repay her fully for what she had done. The image of God's wings was powerful and tender. The same word appears in the Psalms describing God's protective care for his people. Ruth had fled from the false gods of Moab to shelter under the wings of the Almighty, and now Boaz was asking that she experience the fullness of that divine protection. He could not know, in that moment, that he himself would become the very answer to his own prayer. At mealtime, Boaz invited Ruth to eat with him and his workers, to dip her morsel in the wine, another radical act of inclusion. He personally heaped roasted grain before her, and she ate until she was satisfied and had some left over. When she rose to glean again, Boaz commanded his young men to let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and to purposely pull out some from the bundles for her to collect. They were to ensure she gathered abundantly, without rebuke or harassment. That evening, Ruth returned to Naomi with an ephah of barley, approximately half a bushel, an extraordinary amount for a single day's gleaning. She also brought out the food she had saved from her meal. Naomi's bitter spirit began to stir with something that looked almost like hope. "Where did you glean today?" she asked. "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." When Ruth revealed that the man's name was Boaz, Naomi's response erupted with sudden recognition. "Blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead," she declared. "This man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." The word redeemer, goel in Hebrew, carried immense legal and theological significance. A kinsman-redeemer had specific responsibilities outlined in the law. If a man died without an heir, his nearest kinsman was to marry the widow and raise up a son to carry on the dead man's name and inherit his property, as described in Deuteronomy chapter 25 verses 5 through 10. If a man lost his land through poverty, his kinsman was to redeem it, buying it back to keep it in the family line, according to Leviticus chapter 25 verses 25 through 28. The redeemer was the restorer, the one who stepped into the breach of loss and death to resurrect hope and heritage. Boaz was such a man. But he was not the nearest kinsman. There was another, unnamed in the narrative, who held the first right of redemption. This complication hung over the budding hope like a shadow. Ruth continued to glean in Boaz's fields throughout the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, staying close to his young women as he had instructed, living quietly and working diligently. The weeks turned into months. Summer heat bore down on the land. And though Boaz had shown her extraordinary kindness, he had not spoken of marriage, had not moved toward redemption. Perhaps he thought himself too old. Perhaps he hesitated because of her Moabite heritage. Perhaps he waited, not wanting to presume, respecting her right to choose. Then came the end of the harvest, and with it, the winnowing. The grain had been cut and gathered. Now it needed to be separated from the chaff. On the threshing floor, workers would toss the grain into the air with winnowing forks, and the wind would carry away the lighter chaff while the heavier grain fell back down. It was communal work, celebratory work, often lasting late into the night. The owner of the field would sometimes sleep on the threshing floor to guard the grain from thieves. It was in this context that Naomi conceived a plan both daring and dangerous, a plan that would force the question of redemption into the open. Naomi instructed Ruth to wash and anoint herself, to put on her best garment, but not to make herself known to Boaz until he had finished eating and drinking. She was to observe where he lay down, then go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He would tell her what to do. These instructions, found in Ruth chapter 3 verses 3 and 4, seem scandalous on the surface. A woman going alone to a man at night? Uncovering him while he slept? The potential for misunderstanding, for ruin, was enormous. If anyone saw Ruth there, her reputation would be destroyed. She would be labeled a seductress, a woman of loose morals. And yet Naomi trusted in two things: the character of Boaz and the providence of God. Ruth's response revealed her complete trust. "All that you say I will do," she declared. This was the same radical obedience she had shown when she left Moab. She was again staking everything on faith, on the belief that God's wings of protection extended even over a threshing floor at midnight. So Ruth went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had instructed. She watched as Boaz ate and drank, as his heart grew merry with the satisfaction of a successful harvest. When he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, she came softly. The text says she came softly, emphasizing her careful, reverent approach. She uncovered his feet and lay down. The night air was cool. The uncovering of his feet would eventually wake him from the chill. At midnight, something startled Boaz. He turned over and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked into the darkness. Her answer was both humble and bold. "I am Ruth, your servant," she said. "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." The word translated wings is the same word Boaz had used when he blessed her, praying that God would shelter her under his wings. Ruth was now asking Boaz to become the answer to his own prayer. She was asking him to cover her with the corner of his garment, a symbolic act that represented marriage and protection. She was proposing to him, essentially, but framing it in terms of his legal obligation as a kinsman-redeemer. Boaz's response, recorded in Ruth chapter 3 verses 10 through 13, was immediate and filled with blessing. "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter," he said. This latter kindness, her willingness to marry a kinsman-redeemer rather than seeking a younger man, whether rich or poor, was greater than her first kindness to Naomi. "All the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman," he affirmed. Her character was beyond reproach. Her reputation in Bethlehem, despite her foreign origins, was impeccable. But then came the complication he had to address. "It is true, I am a redeemer," Boaz acknowledged, "but there is a redeemer nearer than I." The law gave the nearest kinsman the first right and responsibility of redemption. Boaz would not circumvent the law, would not act with dishonor, even for the woman he clearly cherished. "Remain tonight," he told her. "In the morning, if the nearer kinsman will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you." He swore an oath by the living God. His word was his bond, backed by divine witness. Ruth lay at his feet until morning, but she arose before one could recognize another, before the light would reveal her presence. Boaz understood the danger to her reputation. "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor," he said. This secrecy was not shame but protection. He had her hold out the shawl she was wearing and measured 6 measures of barley into it, another act of extravagant generosity. She returned to the city to Naomi, carrying both grain and hope. When Naomi saw her and heard what had transpired, her response was simple. "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest but will settle the matter today." Naomi knew Boaz's character. A man who would make such an oath would not delay. The dawn had barely broken, and already the wheels of redemption were turning. Boaz went up to the gate of the city, the place where legal matters were transacted, where the elders sat to judge disputes and witness contracts. This was the public square, the court of the people. He sat down there, positioning himself where the nearer kinsman would have to pass. And as providence would have it, the nearer kinsman came by. "Come over and sit down here," Boaz called to him. The text never gives us this man's name, referring to him only as so-and-so, perhaps indicating that those who refuse to participate in God's redemptive purposes are forgotten by history. Boaz gathered 10 men of the elders of the city as witnesses. Then he laid out the situation to the nearer kinsman. "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech," he explained. He presented it as a business opportunity. "If you will redeem it, Boaz said. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." The nearer kinsman's response came quickly. "I will redeem it," he said. Land was wealth, security, legacy. The opportunity to expand one's holdings was not to be dismissed lightly. But then Boaz revealed the full cost of redemption. "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." This changed everything. Redeeming the land was one thing. Marrying the widow and raising up a son in the dead man's name meant that the redeemed land would ultimately go to that son, not to the Redeemer's own heirs. It was an act of generosity that would cost his own estate. The nearer kinsman's refusal was immediate. "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance," he declared. He explicitly transferred his right of redemption to Boaz. In that ancient custom, he removed his sandal and gave it to Boaz as a symbol of the transaction, a visible testimony that he was walking away from his opportunity and responsibility. Boaz turned to the elders and all the people gathered at the gate. "You are witnesses this day," he proclaimed, "that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place." The people and the elders responded with their blessing, recorded in Ruth chapter 4 verses 11 and 12. They invoked Rachel and Leah, the mothers of Israel, praying that Ruth would build up the house of Israel. They blessed Boaz's house, praying it would be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring the Lord would give him by Ruth. This blessing was profoundly significant. Tamar, like Ruth, was a foreigner who had shown remarkable courage and faithfulness. When her husband died and her father-in-law Judah failed to give her his youngest son as the law required, Tamar disguised herself and conceived by Judah himself, bearing twins, one of whom was Perez. From Perez came the line of Judah, and from that line would come David, and from David, the Messiah. The people at the gate, perhaps without fully understanding, were prophesying over Ruth's future, connecting her story to the great redemptive arc of Israel's history. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. The Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Naomi, blessing the Lord who had not left her without a redeemer. This son, they prophesied, would be a restorer of life and a nourisher of her old age, for her daughter-in-law who loves her, who is more to her than 7 sons, had given birth to him. Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became his nurse. The women named him Obed, which means servant or worshipper. This child would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David, the king after God's own heart. The book of Ruth concludes with a genealogy that traces the line from Perez through Boaz and Obed to David, found in Ruth chapter 4 verses 18 through 22. But the story does not end there. In the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, we find Ruth's name. She is one of only 4 women mentioned in that genealogy, and the only one explicitly identified as a foreigner. Ruth the Moabite, the widow who risked everything on the threshing floor, became the great-grandmother of David and an ancestor of Jesus, the ultimate Redeemer. The threshing floor, that place where grain and chaff are separated, became the stage for a greater separation, a greater winnowing. It was there that Ruth's faith was tested and proven. It was there that Boaz's character was revealed in its fullness. It was there that the question of redemption, hanging in the balance for weeks, was finally forced into the open. And it was there, in the vulnerability of midnight, that divine providence orchestrated an encounter that would ripple through generations, ultimately bringing forth the Savior of the world. Ruth's boldness that night was not the boldness of presumption but of faith refined in the fire of loss. She had lost her husband, her homeland, her security. She had chosen loyalty over comfort, faith over familiarity. And when the moment came to act, to step into her own redemption story, she moved with the courage of one who had already surrendered everything to God. She knew that Boaz could refuse her. She knew that discovery could ruin her. But she also knew that without risk, there is no redemption. Without stepping into the uncertain darkness, there is no dawn. Boaz, for his part, embodied the heart of the Redeemer. He was under no obligation to show Ruth such favor. The law required him to allow gleaning, but he went far beyond the minimum, ensuring her safety, her dignity, and her provision. When she came to him in the night, he could have taken advantage of her vulnerability. Instead, he protected her reputation and committed himself to do everything legally and honorably to secure her future. He saw beyond her foreign origins to her faithful heart. He valued her character above cultural prejudice. In him, we see a shadow of the greater Boaz, Jesus Christ, who left the riches of heaven to redeem his bride, the church, paying the ultimate price to bring us into his inheritance. The story of Ruth and Boaz is a love story, yes, but it is far more. It is a redemption story that reveals the heart of God himself. It shows us that God's family is not limited by ethnicity or nationality. His grace extends to the foreigner, the outcast, the one who comes seeking refuge under his wings. It demonstrates that God orchestrates the smallest details of our lives, the happenstance that leads us to the right field, the conversation that reveals our character, the midnight encounter that changes everything. It teaches us that redemption often requires risk, that we must sometimes step into the darkness trusting in the character of the Redeemer rather than the certainty of the outcome. Ruth could not see, as she lay at Boaz's feet, that she was participating in a story far greater than her own survival. She could not know that her son's grandson would be a king, or that her lineage would culminate in the King of Kings. She simply acted in faith, in loyalty, in love. And God, who sees the end from the beginning, wove her faithfulness into the very fabric of salvation history. This is the invitation the story extends to each of us. We are all, in our own way, foreigners seeking refuge, widows in need of redemption, outcasts looking for a place to belong. We come with nothing to offer but our need and our faith. And we discover that there is a Redeemer who has already noticed us, who has already made provision, who waits for us to come boldly to the place of winnowing, where everything false is blown away and only what is true remains. He does not despise our vulnerability. He honors our courage. And he commits himself, with an oath backed by his very life, to secure our redemption, no matter the cost. If this story has stirred something within you, if you have heard echoes of your own journey in Ruth's bold faith and Boaz's faithful redemption, I invite you to share this message with others who need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue exploring together the profound depths of Scripture, the stories that are not merely ancient history but living truth that speaks to our deepest needs and highest hopes. The threshing floor still calls to us, that place where we must lay down our fears, uncover our need, and ask the Redeemer to spread His wings over us. He will not turn us away. As the Lord lives, He will redeem us. This is His promise, His covenant, His eternal commitment to those who come seeking refuge under His wings.